I want to thank you all for joining us this afternoon. My name is Ken Coopwood, and I'm the Vice President for Diversity and Inclusion here at Missouri State University. We're in for a very special treat this afternoon, and that treat would be that we get to listen to the voice of probably, certainly in my opinion, one of the more prolific speakers in the country with regard to social justice and public affairs. We're here to listen to Mr. Jeff Johnson, who has made a career of making change in communities across the United States. Mr. Johnson and I go back a few years where I first saw him on the campus of Indiana University, the Bloomington campus, where he captivated about 300 college students, just like many of us here this afternoon. He is a motivator to get young people engaged in social action to make better communities. And I think you'll hear some of that tonight. In addition to that, he has a syndicated voice on political issues that are pertinent to all societies, races, creeds, and cultures. And I, again, believe you'll hear some of that tonight as well. We are only in our second year of the statewide collaborative diversity conference, and I believe that you will agree with me after this presentation that already we've attracted some of the best talent in the country to deal with diversity issues that make our communities more collaborative and more relevant. So without any further ado, let me introduce to you Mr. Jeff Johnson.
Good evening. Good evening. Those of you that were there earlier know that that's terrible. Good evening. Good evening. That's much better. Thank you so much. It is a great honor and privilege to be here. I'd like to thank Ken and everyone in his office, all that are a part of putting this conference together, all the presenters that have come before and after me, as well as those of you that have found it not robbery to be here. We have a short amount of time to have this discussion, and so I want to get right into it and hopefully leave enough time for us to engage one another. But really talking from this notion of destroying the echo chamber to develop the ecosystem. And what does that mean? That means that so often when we are talking about diversity and inclusion, that many of us, even well-meaning and passionate, are more concerned with our own voice than we are with the broader community. And so whether I'm representing one group or another group, whether I am a part of a marginalized group that is dealing with limited resources, so often even people who are in it for the right reasons only are concerned about their voice, their group, their needs, their desires, how they're impacted in the campus or in the community, and not necessarily connecting to how what happens to them affects the rest of the campus, the rest of the community, and vice versa. And so destroying an echo chamber, and an echo chamber, as most of you know, is simply, in many cases, an empty room that is designed to be able to reverberate sound. And in an echo chamber, you are convinced that your voice is actually louder than it is more powerful than it is more relevant than it is more forceful than it actually is. In some cases, that you even believe it's more effective than it actually is. And so how many of us know people, and sometimes have even been those people, that are passionate about an issue but never listen to anybody else? Are passionate about an issue but don't want to hear about anybody else's issues? Are passionate about an issue but don't see how we connect to other folks' issues? So destroying the echo chamber is not about destroying existing programs. It's not about dismantling existing infrastructure. It's not even about shifting existing resources. It's about changing our thinking and acknowledging the fact that there is an ecosystem that exists that we're a part of whether we acknowledge it or not. And an ecosystem in formal terms is a biological community of interacting organisms and its physical environment. A biological community of interacting organisms and their physical environment. Now, within an ecosystem, those organisms seldom have conversations with the other organisms within the ecosystem. They simply do their job. And in doing their job, they don't have to understand, but in doing their job, they're affecting the other pieces of that ecosystem. Now, in a healthy ecosystem, when everyone is doing their job, the entire ecosystem is healthy. In a dysfunctional ecosystem, folks don't do their job, which makes the entire ecosystem unhealthy. What we find very often as we are attempting to build diversity, create community, talk about inclusion, is we aren't talking about how the work that we do positively affects the entire ecosystem. How what we have to talk about, what we have to say, if we do our jobs the right way, benefits the entire campus, benefits the entire city, increases opportunity within the state that we're in, creates more effective and more engaging individuals within the country that we live in. If we are acknowledging the ecosystem, then we are setting everybody up to be better, even those that are opposed to what it is that we're doing. I know that's hard for some of us to believe. But even those that disagree with us benefit from the work that we do when we do it through the context of an ecosystem versus an echo chamber where we're the only ones that are right. Our issue is more important than everybody else's. What I have to say is more important than everybody else's. And so how do we begin to acknowledge that ecosystem? First is play your role. I see somebody appreciates that. The second half of that is stop trying to play other people's. Some of you have to be told that expressly. Stop trying to do the job of other people, especially when you have not mastered yours. You have enough time and energy that needs to go into you mastering your job than trying to do somebody else's. And what does that really mean? That means that it is okay for you to understand that your individual gift puts you in this specific space at this specific time to be able to complete a certain number of tasks, where if those tasks are done, they affect the ecosystem in a positive way. And you don't have to, in any real way, begin to try to stick your hands in other people's jobs, in other people's spaces, in other people's departments, in other people's divisions, in other people's lives, because it's not yours. It's not yours professionally. If you believe, as I believe, in a broader kind of spiritual reality, you ain't been called to do that. Some of you don't get that, that's okay. But what that means is, and what's beautiful about that, is that we can evolve within the ecosystem in which we exist. So that does not mean we're set to do the same job for the next 25 years. Hopefully, as we evolve, so will our opportunities. And that means we will shift and move throughout that ecosystem, doing different things in different spaces at different times as we learn more, as we master more, as we become more proficient, as we create better vision, as we create more sophisticated relationships and partnerships, as we have access to greater resources. We will evolve to be able to do more than where we've started. If you are working right now in one area, whether it's working with LGBTQ issues, whether it's working with Latino issues, Asian issues, African American issues, Muslim issues, immigration issues, other marginalized group issues, whatever it is, working with the disabled, whatever it is, no matter which area you're working in, go gangster right there. No, seriously. And some of you are gangster right now, right? Because some of you walk in the room and they like, damn, here she come talking about disabled people again. Here he comes talking about these Latinos again. Here she comes talking about black people again. That's what you want. Because that's what it means to be a responsible representative of the group that you've been charged to lead, to represent, to work for, to advocate for, to build for, to create opportunity for. Now, it doesn't mean that you have to be a jerk when you do it. It doesn't mean that you have to be condescending when you do it. It doesn't mean that you have to be irritating too much when you do it. But those of us that work in this space sometimes know that if we're not irritating, nothing happens. If we're not aggressive, nobody listens. If we're not persistent, then nobody hears us. If we're not going hard, then people are disengaged. And so number one, if we are going to acknowledge this ecosystem, play your role. And when you're playing your role, find opportunities to be able to get consistent, relevant, meaningful, and impactful training. Because what is worse than anything else to me is somebody existing in an ecosystem that is in a job they don't know how to do. And then perpetually don't know how to do it. So if I meet you and you just got into this space, and I'm acknowledging you just got hired, this is your first job out of college, you care about the people that you're working with, you have the heart for it, but you just may not have had the time to be able to have mastery around the intricacies of this work, I get it. But if I see you 5 years later and you have the same level of capacity, something is not wrong with the space, something is wrong with you. And there are people that work not just in diversity and inclusion, but especially in government and universities, where people hide in these positions and they burrow themselves into them. And they stay there year after year after year after year after year after year until they actually believe they created it. And it was created just for them. I think firing people is a beautiful thing, especially when they don't need to be there and they don't have impact. You remove that being a necessity, unless there are serious budget cuts, by being excellent at what you do. Ecosystems rely on organisms doing at the maximum level the job that they are supposed to do within that broader community. Because if, for instance, and all of us in some way or another have seen ecosystems that have started to fail because one organism or another is either removed from that ecosystem or is limited in that ecosystem. And so if we find ourselves in the Serengeti and we are looking at African lions, there is no lion in the Serengeti that says just on GP, I think I'm going to be vegan. This wildebeest giving me gas. I just want to have plants. Trust me, it'll be a better life for me. That doesn't happen because in the rest of the ecosystem we're in, human beings are the only organism within our ecosystem that can decide whether or not they will do what they've been called here to do without dying a physical death. Lions, if they stop eating, they die. But not only do they die, they affect the health of the entire pride. The health of the entire pride ultimately affects what animals are there and not there. Overpopulation of another animal affects other animals that are there. We are all connected in one way or another, and we've got to understand that the work that we do is connected to others. And so once we are doing our job effectively, that gives us the ability to do number two, which is create sophisticated partnerships. Understanding who has similar work, who has work that overlaps, who has work that is in line with the work that we do, who has work that in some cases dovetails, who has work that is systemically affected by the work that we do. If you were working in an office where your desire or your mission is to be able to ensure the matriculation and graduation of a specific group, African Americans or Latinos, for instance, and we understand in many cases that black male and Latino male retention and graduation in many cases is normally lower than their peers. If we understand that, you know that it's not just about working with the African American men on that campus. You understand that normally the three things that affect matriculation and graduation are financial support, social support, and academic support resources, financial resources, and social connectivity. So if I come to a campus where I don't feel at home, I'm homesick the better majority of the time, I don't relate to most of the people that are here, then that is affecting, in many cases, my ability to maximize my coursework and effectively matriculate. I know that if I don't have enough money to pay for classes, then 9 times out of 10 I won't be here next semester. I know that if I don't have effective academic support services, either because I don't seek them or because they don't exist, either or, then I am going to be in a place where I don't make it. That means if my concern is working with that group, then my main focus is lining up the resources that systemically affect that area that I have to work with and beginning to create partnerships with those offices so we all win. If we increase the matriculation and graduation of this specific group, then those academic support services offices, they win. Then those student support services office, they win. The resources that are connected to providing financial aid for students that are like those students, they win also. Because we're connecting resources to students who are going to graduate. We're connecting support services to students who are going to matriculate. We're creating a model of what we can do to be successful in this ecosystem, understanding I'm doing my job, you're doing your job, we're intersecting in the place where it makes sense, and the ecosystem is healthy as a result of it. So how do you? And for some of us, that's challenging, and here's why. It's challenging because many of us create relationships based on personality, not based on necessity. Is anyone in this room honest enough to say if you searched the innermost reaches of your mind, that you can think of someone that you should be working with, but you don't because you don't like them? I appreciate the brother in the back. Thank you, sir. Salute. I know that I've seen that. I know that I've done that. I know I've counseled people through that. I know that if I go to a campus, inevitably, they are not going to say that's the reason why. But ultimately, you've been there too long to not know you should be working with them. You know they're there. You know that your stuff intersects. Why do you not work together? And so part of that is understanding we've got to reduce ego and we've got to have greater vision to be able to create sophisticated partnerships, again, to benefit the entire and broader community. After we've been able to focus and master our job, after we've been able to look at what are some opportunities for sophisticated and non-traditional partnerships on campus, we also have to understand that our ecosystem is not relegated to the campuses where we work. The ecosystem that we're in is the world that we're sending kids out into. And if we don't believe that we are a part of affecting that global ecosystem and that ecosystem affects us, then we're truly missing the point of why we are engaging young people in the first place. And I see so often that we block ourselves into these ivy walls, and many of us never go out into the community around where our school is, let alone begin to connect with campuses that are within the same state, let alone begin to connect with similar campuses in other parts of the country that are doing the kind of programs either we want to do, have mastered programs we dream about, or are trying to build the similar kind of programs that we are. Let alone, with technology, begin to create sister programs in other parts of the world. I was in Berlin in December and was working with the German Marshall Fund with some young electeds and young activists from Germany that were looking to create social movement and engaging primarily people of color in that social movement. One of the things that they asked is, why do we find it so difficult to connect with young people in the States that are doing what we're doing here? And I said to them, I don't know why you find it so difficult. I mean, Facebook and Twitter alone should give you the ability to make connectivity. But if I'm honest, most of, not all, of the young activists of color that I know here in the States are so focused on local issues, unless they are international students, or unless they are second or third generation immigrants, that they don't even see beyond their city or their state, which drastically limits their ability to be able. Almost everything that we're doing can be a global movement because there are people all over the world trying to do it. And if we would begin to connect with folks in Asia, in Europe, in Africa, in the Caribbean, then we would be able to create greater infrastructure, create greater resources for the young people that we work with, God forbid, find best practices for ourselves, and be able to create alliances of individuals that are created to the same goal. And normally when we do things together, we're more powerful than when we do things apart. And so can you begin to look at what relationships can exist for you outside of this camp or outside of your campus, outside of your office, outside of your state, outside of your region, outside of the country, outside of the continent, please, because there's power that's waiting for you there. And people of color, disabled folks, people of different faiths, people in the LGBT community are all fighting for access, for equity, for equality, for dignity in almost every part of the world. And so if we think that we are unique here, we've truly lost sight of the work that we're doing. Because there are folks in other parts of the world that are fighting just as hard as you with just as many limited resources that would love to be able to learn from you, but also teach you the things that they've learned through their work. Last but not least, because I want to be able to open it up, and we only have until about 8 o'clock, and I'll keep talking if nobody has questions, but I'm almost sure that some of you do. After we've been able to build sophisticated relationships immediately around us and then begin to use that as an opportunity to build broader relationships, then is the time where we have to engage even those that do not agree with what we do, but in some way, shape, or form have the authority to make decisions over what we do or affect what we do, to be able to create opportunities to build in areas where we actually do intersect. And what do I mean by that? There's a story. How many people in here know who Marcus Garvey was? Marcus Garvey was a Jamaican immigrant into the United States that created an organization called the Universal Negro Improvement Association around 1919, and was brilliant because with no Facebook, no Twitter, no phones, no fax machines, had chapters in almost every sub-Saharan African country, in all of the Caribbean, in the United States, and in Europe. And it was about the empowerment of African people, about the unity of African people. There was a ship line that he created. There was a publication called the Negro World. He created the red, black, and green flag. I'm just giving you some context of who he was within African American and diasporic leadership space. He was incredibly criticized because he met with the Klan and wanted to create a relationship with an agreement with the Klan. And people were like, well, what is wrong with you? And he said, they want the same thing I want. They don't want to live around, deal with, work with, look at black people. I don't want to live around, work with, look at, be with white people. We have a beautiful thing in common. And while other people may see us as enemies, we can actually be allies because we can create some spaces to give each other what we want. Now, whether or not you agree fundamentally with their ideological position is not the point. The point is that they were able to find partnership in the most unusual places with somebody that others thought that they should be totally opposed to the point that they would never even talk to each other. They were able to see beyond what other people saw to be able to see an opportunity. What that also means is, can you have the ability in this incredibly political world that you all are existing in? Political from the standpoint of garnering resources at your institution, politically charged as it relates to getting policy set, as it relates to the areas that you fight for. Can you be Machiavellian enough, can you play chess enough to understand that part of being in an ecosystem is also about, can you create public enemies that are private allies? Hello? Public enemies that are private allies. How many of you know right now somebody that is in a position that privately agrees with equity, inclusion, diversity, community, development, empowerment of most of the people on your campuses, but publicly would never go on record saying how much they support it? That's not a rhetorical question. How many of you know somebody on your campus that will privately talk about how much they support something, but publicly won't? Y'all are in some wonderful places. No, I see you. I see you. You need to meet more people. What I have found in almost every campus is very seldom do you find individuals above the position of vice president who are not vice presidents of diversity and inclusion going hard for diversity and inclusion. Now, if you have that, God bless you. Please come up and present so we can figure out what your institution did that other institutions did not. We would love to be able to figure that out. But most institutions do not have that. And they do not have that because in many cases there is an opinion that diversity groups are constantly looking to take resources versus add value. It is always a question of we don't have the resources for that. We can't take resources from this. We can't allocate resources toward this. We can't use resources to do this, and this. When the question is not about new resources, it's about more effectively utilizing existing resources. These are already students at your institution. Thus, they have already paid to be served. The question is, are you allocating existing funds in more strategic ways as opposed to being able to throw money at the wall, being able to strategically do surgery and put resources in the places where they're most effectively used? Removing antiquated methodologies and antiquated ways of thinking and antiquated ways of setting up operations and offices to be able to be fluid enough to look at your campus, what your campus needs in 2014, 15, 16, 2025, not what it needed in 2001, in 1999, and definitely not in 1965. Right? So it requires us to be sophisticated enough to be able to play the public-private game so that you're able to utilize the strength of those that can do more for you in private than they can for you in public, even if they don't ever come out and say, I'm for you. Even if there are times they have to say, I'm not really sure how I feel about this piece of legislation. I'm not sure how I feel about this new dorm. I'm not sure how I feel about this new office. I'm not sure how I feel is a much better response than I don't like it, than I'm opposed to it. And many times we force the hand of people that want to be allies for us by forcing them to come out on something too strongly when they could be of real benefit to us if we allowed them to work behind the scenes. That really is also what the byproduct of an ecosystem is. It's giving people the space to be able to, in an authentic way, support the development of the ecosystem, even if they're not riding 100% with you, and figuring out ways to be able to work with them where it makes sense so that when they are working with you, it's authentic and it feels authentic. There's nothing worse than coming to diversity events and inclusion events and knowing that half the audience doesn't want to be there. I can't tell you how many times I go to campuses and I say thank you to all the students that came because they wanted to come, and thank you to all the students that had to be here because your professor told you to. And that's okay. I am honestly thankful that both groups are there, because the students that came because they had to still are exposed to conversation that they should be exposed to. And if only 1% of them leave there with something different that they're willing to think about, then we've done our job. And so as opposed to being angry about students not coming because they wanted to, most students I know would rather be at the concert that's getting ready to start than be here listening to me. When I was in college, I would have rather been at the concert that's getting ready to start, even as a Black Student Union president or student government president. Because as a student, there are times when I just don't want to think about stuff that's serious. I just don't want to deal with stuff that is heavy. I don't want to deal with stuff that isn't enjoyable because I'm already dealing with so much. And so let's use folks where we can, understanding that they don't have to believe what we believe, talk the way we talk, walk the way we walk to benefit the issue that we want. And if we would look more broadly at who they are, what they're attempting to do, we could find opportunities to, again, to be able to embrace that we're in an ecosystem, be able to understand how we contribute to that ecosystem. And finally, because I should have mentioned this earlier, part of that is removing this sense. When people attempt to attack your humanity long enough, a lot of times you have to convince yourself you're human. And marginalized groups very often are so busy trying to defend why they have an office, why they have a program, why they get these resources, why these students have an organization, why they have a budget, that at some point we have actually forgotten that we deserve it. Whether it's because institutional past inequity, or whether it's because this is a dominant group on our campus that needs proper representation and support to be able to complete the mission of the institution. If we're willing to create ecosystems, we have the ability to not only be more effective in the work that we're doing, but we also have the ability to create a better campus. And if you all were there earlier, that really is the goal. The goal is to create a more powerful campus. The goal is to create a campus that sees people as human. The goal is to be able to acknowledge the humanity in all of the students that are there. The goal is to create a system that effectively matriculates and graduates all students, regardless of where they come from. The goal is to be able to challenge our ignorances when we come onto the campus. The goal is to be able to create opportunities to have conversations that you'll never have out in the world, because the college campus is the space where you're supposed to be able to have intellectual discussion about what the world won't talk about. But it requires courageous staff people. It requires courageous executives. It requires courageous administrators. And it requires courageous students. And if we can create through an ecosystem to build that, then we will see it work. If we're comfortable just being in our echo chamber shouting at the wall, then God bless you. Have a great time with that. And continue to be comfortable in a space where you're talking loud to yourself, not changing the campus. And if we're going to be honest, a whole lot of you, if you were honest, are shouting loud at the wall and not acknowledging the ecosystem in a way that you can affect not only yourself, but the entire campus. Questions? Yes, sir. Oh, you know what? And let's do this, because I want to make sure that we hear you. I also want to make sure that the camera hears you. We're going to have people at both aisles. If you all would come down the aisle and use the mic, I would greatly appreciate it. Oh, yeah, they have something up there for me. Thank you. If you could tell me your name, that'd be great.
Yeah. My name is Travis Boyd. I just want to know your thoughts on the recent Supreme Court decision for states like Michigan and Washington.
Yep.
They've upheld the ban for affirmative action in admissions policies.
Do you want, well, I'll say this.
Just your thoughts, just real quick.
No
on
surprise. No surprise. Do I think it's right? The jury is out for me on that. I think that there are a large number of affirmative action programs that don't necessarily work, and that we've got to do a better job of figuring out how to level the playing field. And many states have done knee-jerk reactions and unsophisticated reactions or quotas, and the data just proves that those don't necessarily work as effectively as they should. However, from a political standpoint, I grew up in Ohio. I went to school in Toledo. I know what Michigan is like. I mobilized in Michigan. I marched for when the case was initially, the original University of Michigan case was in the Sixth Circuit Court in Cincinnati. And I also know the composition of this Supreme Court. So when something is decided 6-2, it's not a surprise. And when you know the composition of the court, you understand the political reality. But from an ideological reality, I think that there are some ways that we should look at leveling the playing field. I think if we look at California in particular in Proposition 209, Proposition 209 did the same thing that this case did in Michigan and California. And we've seen literally an 80% reduction in the number of people of color and poor folks in graduate programs in particular in the state of California. It hasn't affected it to the same degree at the undergraduate level. But at the graduate level, you've seen 80% reductions in certain programs, law school, medical school. In fact, there were just some students, African-American students in California, I believe they were medical school students, that were protesting about that very thing. So I think that indicates that there's some things that we need to do, but we just got to be smarter about how we do it.
Okay, so in general, do you agree that the Constitution protects that? So should the states decide that on their own and that at that state level, or do you uphold the Supreme Court's decision that it is, their decision to make?
That's a great question.
Because there is an affirmative action clause.
Oh, no doubt.
I mean,
no doubt. I think that we have to do a better job of electing reasonable elected officials. And when we elect reasonable elected officials at both the federal, state, and local level, then we have reasonable policy.
Well, I do believe...
So to answer that, I'm less concerned about is it decided at the federal level or is it decided at the state level. I'm more concerned with what I see our politics becoming more and more, which is just my way or no way. And when people are on different sides of the aisle, they just don't get together to be able to approve anything. And I think what we're seeing in Congress is less of a reflection of what we see at the state level, because normally at the state level, the dichotomy between one party and the other is so vastly underwhelmed or overwhelmed that there's no need for debate. One party is able to just pass through whatever they want. So until we do that, we're going to have problems whether it's a state level or federal level issue.
I'm not sure if I'm mistaken or not, but I think the Supreme Court was pretty much even on judges elected by Democratic and Republican presidents. And I do believe somebody had to excuse themselves as well, so that kind of might have affected the balance, but...
Yeah, but you and I both know that being selected by a Democratic or Republican president doesn't mean that you're liberal, moderate, or conservative. And so there have been conservative-leaning justices appointed by Democratic presidents, and we've even seen in the last 2 years our Supreme Court, our Chief Justice, be a little bit more moderate than I think hardcore conservatives would have ever thought Roberts was going to be when they saw him take the bench. So it's interesting to see how that ebbs and flows issue to issue. But great question, thank you.
Hi.
Hey.
I have been here in Missouri, in Springfield now for about 3 years. And I have a significant concern about the health of the ecosystem because of apathy. And I'm wondering what is my role of how to combat the apathy of our students and the people in the community to make the ecosystem more healthy?
Work.
Are there ways to motivate the ecosystem? What can I do to get the students more engaged and get them excited and want to work?
Work on what?
Whatever the ecosystem needs.
Well,
with regards to community and diversity.
Okay, so let me say this. I don't know any kids that are apathetic. Exactly. I know young people that don't want to fight for what you want. Right. And so I know you show me young people, I show you young people that's pissed off about something. You show me, well, let me finish. You show me young people, I'll show you young people that care about something. You show me young people, I'll show you young people that have aspirations and desires. Now, what they don't necessarily have is a historical context of bringing those things about the way we brought them about. What they don't have is an allegiance to traditional institutions that have normally been connected with bringing about what we want to see brought about. What they also don't have is a historical memory of understanding the role that young people have always played in that process. And so when we look at young people of the past, I can, any city I go into, any state I go into, I see young people that are doing activist work, but almost always on their own. Not connected to an NAACP, not connected to a La Raza, not connected to this organization. They've even started the organization, or they are younger organizations, or they're not doing them through organizations at all. And what they're lacking is substantive training. And so it's not so often that young people don't care, is that they haven't necessarily been trained in hardcore skill sets that give them the tools necessary to say, how do we create vision? How do we take that vision and develop strategy? How do we then build a team that knows how to walk that strategy out? How do we create measurable goals within the process of reaching that? How do we create benchmarks and evaluation processes to be able to navigate if we're doing that? How do we create regular training opportunities so that people are still there? How do we train people, our own peers, so that when we're leaving, we've got people coming in after us? How do we look for mentors in the right way, not those that have big titles or positions or all this stuff, but just some elders that's up in the spot that's willing to share, right? So you show me the elders who are training young people to do that, and I'll show you young people that translate their anger, their frustration, their passion, their concerns into institutional, fundamental, and substantive action. Otherwise, you just got kids to be mad and tweeting, right? Because for them, that is the vehicle by which they believe it makes an impact. What you mean? My stuff got retweeted 200 times. You only have 5 people at your meeting. No, seriously. No, I'm serious. So how do we, who have 5 people at our meeting, say that we're more effective than them when 100 people retweeted their message and ain't nobody talking about what y'all talking about, right? Not you. I'm not saying you in particular. So I really just wanted to deal with that apathetic piece. To get to what I think you can do is be willing to work with the catalysts. On every campus, I don't care where you are, just like in every community, it's about 2 or 3 people that's ready to turn that thing out. We're so busy waiting on the masses to come that we don't deal with them. It doesn't need to be 100 people. It doesn't need to be 200 people. Give me 2 kids that's gangster, and I will show you how to change the campus. Give me 3 kids that are willing to come, and I'll show you some kids that can change their city. And it won't happen overnight, but young people, just like not so young people, are bandwagoners. And it's called the movement because we're supposed to move. For us now, it's the meeting. So you coming to the meeting? No, I'm not coming to the meeting. Because if I ask you what you're doing at the meeting, you can't tell me. There's no agenda, there's no vision, there's no strategy, and we just want to come together and have passionate conversations about what's wrong versus sophisticated strategy about how we're going to change it. Lastly, young people don't want the hype. They want the real. Now, they want to have some relevant hype within the real. But I'm at a place right now, like I don't want to go to any more events where it's televised conversations, where it's the state of this or the state of that, or people doing press releases coming out of meetings. I'm confused. What are you doing a press release about? There are some young people that want to work in private, under the veil, in the shadows. Doesn't mean they don't come out. It means they understand they're protected there and that we can incubate them there and we can give them power there so that when we release them out, they've got the tools instead of just the passion. And I think that's where the real opportunity is.
Hello, I'm Charlie Parker from the University of Missouri. I just want to say kudos for answering that affirmative action question. I thought you navigated that extremely well. It was a difficult question. I just had a quick question of, I think the message is essential for all of us, students, staff, and young professionals and administration. And so I would ask you, what would you say to someone who's at this talk right now who's going to go back into that academic structure or institution that is not necessarily as befitting as the message that we're getting here, what would you say to them when they have to go back into that structure that is not permissive of everything that we've learned here today? Like, what would you say to encourage them or to keep them lifted in going back into an academic structure that's not permit progressive behavior?
I would say all the stuff I just said.
Okay.
No, seriously, right? I mean, we're talking about these things because the institutions that we go to aren't perfect yet. We're having this conference because the institutions that we go to are lacking in certain areas, need to improve in certain areas. Even if they're doing great, there's still places that they can evolve. And if they're doing terrible, there's a whole lot that they can do. So I would encourage you to be able to find partners in this work, and partners in this work that don't necessarily work where you do. Because sometimes you need a soldier that you can talk to that hadn't been looking at you all day. And somebody that can help remind you that you're not insane. Because I don't know about you all, but in this work will make you crazy.
True.
And there will be people that will constantly looking at you like, why are you working so hard at this when we don't need it? And you're saying, what do you mean we don't need it? Are you looking at these students who are here? And they're like, what students? So you know, there are times when we'll be crazy, but I think it's just about those pragmatic things. And then the question is figuring out how the stuff that we've learned here actually works where we are. And we will find that, you know, 65% of what I heard Jeff say isn't going to work here. So use the 35. For all of the presenters that have come here, they're talking about the work that they've done. They're talking about where they've done it. They're talking about best practices they've seen. They're talking about the things that they've seen work, the strategies that hopefully they've actually been engaged in, and then some of their own, you know, theory around some of this work. But as we talked about earlier, there's no silver bullet to any of this. And things that I've seen work at one campus didn't work at all at another campus. Things that I've seen work at this campus only worked half at this campus, because all of us have nuances where we are. And so being encouraged is one, I think, just believing that we can make a difference. And I just haven't seen a campus created where somebody that's willing to work hard enough with the right folks and be able to build coalition can't impact the campus. It doesn't mean that we change it into a utopia overnight, but it does mean if we're satisfied making the small incremental steps, then 10 small incremental steps turns into a large one. And I just believe too, falling on your face, failing, and getting up still has you closer to your destiny than standing still on your feet. And so just go big and be willing to make mistakes, and be willing to be provocative, and be willing to make recommendations that don't make sense to other people at the same time that we make very pragmatic and measured kind of recommendations. We've got to have a strategy of all of those things so that our higher ups, who are normally willing to take smaller steps before they're willing to take large ones, have a menu of things to choose from in this movement to be able to make community building real.
Thank you.
Hi, I'm Femi.
Hello.
So, my question is, I'm from Nigeria, and I'll be graduating from Truman State in 2 weeks.
Congratulations.
Originally, the goal was to go back home and try to help the economy and stuff like that. But, you know, eventually, my parents told me not to come home, and one of the reasons is because it's not safe. It's in a lot of trouble right now. But I realized that the reverse is the case now, because exclusion is highly encouraged, especially for religious backgrounds, depending on where you're from. And also, the LGBT community is actually encouraged to be non-existent. And if you even want to try to talk about it, your life is in danger.
Yep.
So, about that, how do you go about trying to, if you want to even try to think about making a change in that area, like how do you even go about it to start the conversation? Thank you.
No, that's a fantastic question. And just so I can be clear, you are talking about doing specifically LGBTQ work on the continent and in Nigeria, not just doing it here.
On the record, no. Because I know it's being filmed right now, and no.
All right, I got
But you know what I'm talking
Yes,
about.
thank you so much. Thank you. It's horrifying to see what's happening in sub-Saharan Africa right now in certain countries as it relates to LGBTQ reality. What the church, the Christian church in particular, the evangelical church, is doing on the ground in Africa, in my opinion, is criminal. Because it is one thing to be able to quote what the Bible says. It's another thing to be able to put people's life in danger because of what you say the Bible says. And there's a fundamental difference there, and it's scary. So when you begin to say, what can you do to be able to make a difference? I mean, I think that there are clearly folks that are in the space attempting to make that movement real. But one of the things that we're dealing with right now is the reality that we're trying to save people's lives even more than we're trying to change policy. Because the policy has been enacted. And as a result of that policy being enacted, people's lives are in danger. I mean, and Nigeria is not as bad as Uganda. And so when you're talking about being in a place where it is against the law not to tell the law that somebody is gay, and that's what the law is in Uganda. We've seen these things in history over and over again in different spaces at different times with different groups. And so one of the things that I think we can do that has not yet worked very effectively is to begin to challenge some of these Western world leaders that claim to be LGBTQ friendly, to begin putting more political pressure on some of these countries. Some of these countries aren't going to care one way or the other. I mean, when you have citizens in Uganda with signs telling Obama to get out of their business, you understand the pervasive nature of what the movement of the church has been able to do to either, one, empower people to feel like it's not about what anybody else wants to do with their life, it's only what they want everyone to do with their life. And then you have countries that are just in a space where they don't feel they need anything from the United States or other countries, because they're able to get them from other countries that are looking for the opportunity to create relationships and alliances with countries that fall out of grace with us. And we know what that looks like. So, the Chinese are all over sub-Saharan Africa, providing resources in spaces where the United States may not be. And I think we're going to begin to see some other countries do the same thing just because of the wealth of natural resources there. So what you're talking about is incredibly complex. And so I think that there are a couple of things that can be done. I think that you can work on the U.S. side through elected officials here to put pressure on ambassadors and elected officials there to be able to shift existing policy. You can work with NGOs that are on the ground, whether it's about providing support to them on this side of the ocean, that are going in and providing crisis support to individuals that they're actually trying to move out of spaces, and then simultaneously begin to work on messaging, because I think the messaging opportunity is actually with the church. There've got to begin to be some courageous enough churches to say that even if I, as a believer, don't fundamentally believe that homosexuality is right, it does not mean I'm willing to take away the humanity of those that are. And there have got to be some courageous enough church leaders. Now you've got to have a movement that does that, because again, it's dangerous. And so there's an opportunity to begin to help folks even on this side of the pond start engaging and creating a movement that supports church infrastructure, especially larger denominations, not independent evangelicals. Because the independent evangelicals are normally the ones that have the power to spread that kind of message. But if you want to talk about the Methodist Church or the African Methodist Episcopal Church or some of these other larger denominations that have footprints in Nigeria and other parts of sub-Saharan Africa, I think they are the space where there's a great deal of opportunity. So I hope I answered your question and gave you at least some recommendations. But that thing is just an unbelievably heavy lift. And you're in my prayers, brother, as you navigate that. And we have time for one more question. Or none. Going once, going twice. Yes, sir. What was my opinion about the Richard Sherman incident? I loved it. I thought it was fantastic on like every imaginable level. For those of you that don't know, Richard Sherman is a defensive end for the Seattle Seahawks and was chastised in the media for being overly aggressive after coming off a football field, after a game that determined who was going to the Super Bowl. And his aggressive nature coming off the field was used with his physique, his skin color, and his hair, which was locks, to say that this was some ignorant gorilla that was coming off the field, that was unprofessional. And it was great. I loved it because it was an opportunity to be able to say, look how dumb you people are. This guy who graduated with honors from Stanford, who has never gotten into any trouble with the law, who is a quote unquote model citizen, if you will. But it's just a brilliant, thoughtful brother. But to think for a moment that you're not aggressive when you have just been involved in the play that sent your team to the Super Bowl means that we're creating a double standard for folks. And so we're saying we want you to be an incredibly aggressive physical beast on the field. And then the moment after the game is over, we want you to speak Shakespearean English and be docile. I mean, it's like people who are mad at Kanye being a narcissist. It's like you buy his music that's narcissistic and then get mad that he's a narcissist in real life. Anyway, but I thought it was fantastic. I thought it was one of those opportunities, right, to be able to have some of these kind of conversations that we love to have. And I think people actually had them. In certain circles where they wouldn't have happened otherwise. And we always win when that happens because there are people who end up being convicted because it wasn't just white people that came against him. It was people of color, it was black folks, it was all kind of folks that really came down hard on him. And it should not have just been about the fact that he went to Stanford and graduated with honors. It should have been about the fact that what is the expectation that we have for these young men? When we're asking them to do this at this intensity level, what are we really saying to them? So I'm excited about some of these stories that I see coming out. I'm really excited about what's happening in Northwestern with these students creating this union and the legal precedent that is going to set because the NCAA is about to be pissed. It's about to be a problem because they're about to start writing checks. Especially when this judge also ruled that these video games can no longer use the likeness of college players without paying them. So these two legal precedents, and obviously there's going to be, they're going to be in court for a long time determining what the outcome of this is going to be. But I think it says that college players will begin being compensated beyond full ride scholarships if these universities want to continue to make millions and millions of dollars off of using their likeness and not compensating them all, let alone ensuring that they graduate. So thank you all so much for the invitation. Thank you all so much for the attention. But really, honestly, thank you all so much for the work that all of you do on your campuses and in your communities. It really is making lives better for so many students. And I, for one, am honored to be able to be here and share this with you. Thank you all so much.